Gregg Museum. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'd like to introduce Janine LeBlanc, textile consultant and associate curator for this wonderful exhibition. So after the talk, please feel free. It closes on Monday, so you've got the rest of this evening and the weekend to take a look at the show. And so I'll let you get started. I just wanted to mention too, as tempting as it is, please don't touch the quilts and no photography in the museum. Okay, thank you. And we look forward to hearing. She's going to talk a little bit about the graphic design elements in the quilts. Just no photography of the quilts in the show.
Well, welcome to the Gregg. I'm Janine LeBlanc. Can you hear me? Okay, in the back. Textile consultant for this exhibit, graphic art quilts at the Gregg. While Kevin Sullivan, the curator for this exhibit, concentrated on the history of quilt making in women's lives in her talks, I'm going to concentrate on the graphic part of graphic quilts. What I'd like to do is deconstruct quilt design, using the quilts in the exhibit as examples, and tell you some of what I know about quilt making and design in the process. I received my undergraduate degree in graphic design from Massachusetts College of Art in Boston. I worked in graphics for over 25 years. And in 1999, I decided to attend NC State's College of Design to learn to design fabric. But in that process, I realized that I enjoyed working with students and historic and ethnographic textiles far more than working for industry, which leads me here. I've also been making quilts since 1977. First, we'll address the question, what is a quilt? We can generally agree that it's 2 layers of fabric, a top and a backing with some sort of filling. The filling is usually cotton batting, but we also see polyester, wool, or silk batting, blankets, another quilt, flannel, or even old clothing. A quilt doesn't need to have a filling to be a quilt. The fabric for the top and bottom are most often cotton in both printed and woven designs, as well as in solid colors. In this exhibit, we also see wool, velvet, silk, denim, wool jersey knit, polyester double knit, felt, and taffeta. The layers of the quilt are held together with stitching through all 3 layers in order to secure the batting, either by hand, machine, or tied at intervals. It's safe to say that there are many traditions, but few rules. Quilts are generally rectangular, largely because of their use on the bed. The layout of a quilt is referred to as the set. Many quilts, but certainly not all, are constructed using piece blocks. Sashing is the border between the blocks. A contrasting square in the sashing is referred to as the set square. The blocks and sashing can then be surrounded by borders on the outer edge of the quilt. Finally, there's a binding to cover the raw edges. Now, piecing versus applique. Quilt tops can be constructed using either piecing or applique or both. Piecing involves sewing together pieces of fabric with seams. Small shapes are usually cut out using a template for accuracy. Applique is the technique of applying fabric directly to fabric and securing it with stitching. Both techniques can be done either by hand or by machine. A quilt exhibit at the New York's Whitney Museum of Art in 1971 is generally considered the beginning of viewing quilts as art objects in their own right. The exhibit either launched, or more likely coincided with, a revival in interest in quilt making in the 1970s that's still going strong. It was during the mid-1970s to early 1980s that these 2 quilts were made by quilt artist Sass Colby. The quilt on the left, Rainbow, is pieced. The one on the right, Socks, is applique. Both use some of the same fabric, but get very different results. Although we know that men and boys participated in quilt making, either by being makers or assisting, it's safe to assume that most quilt makers were women. While Sass Colby had an art school education, I did look that up, it's probable that most of the quilt makers in this exhibit did not. And yet they used the principles and elements of design successfully. Now, the principles and elements of design. I know some of you are design students and probably have gone over this in your intro to two-dimensional design classes. So we will use one quilt from this exhibit to illustrate the principles and elements of design, and they vary depending on which source you refer to. There are a number of tools that can be employed to create a quilt top or composition. The design elements are the individual items that make up a composition. The design principles, on the other hand, are a way of arranging a composition. We'll look at each in turn. First, the principles of design. This quilt is the one in the lobby as you first enter the exhibit. It's the North Star with applique flowers and pomegranates, circa 1880, by Evelyn Arthur Hill of Greene County, North Carolina. It's the most graphic of the graphic quilts. This quilt is an excellent example of design principles at work. The emphasis, or focal point, is in the middle of the quilt, where there's a small red circle in the center of the compass. This is where the eye goes first. Movement. Your eye moves throughout the composition. It goes out from the center of the compass along its strong points to the sashing and borders, which, since they're diagonals, move your eye around the block. The vines in the outer borders, by their placement, form a circular design, moving your eye further. The background, or white space, gives your eye somewhere to rest. In this quilt, proportion, variety, and contrast interrelate with each other. This quilt uses a variety of shapes and sizes, from the large compass in the center to the small dots in corners of the center block. It uses both organic shapes in the leaves and buds and geometric shapes in the compass, stars, and sashing. It uses both pointed and rounded forms. The blocks and design elements are repeated in a regular pattern. The contrasting sizes and shapes provide the quilt with something interesting to break up the repetition of the blocks. The quilt top is symmetrically balanced so that the right and left, the top and bottom, are the same. Notice that the use of the reds and yellows in the rectangular blocks are reversed, top and bottom, and left and right. So there's red buds and yellow buds. The overall composition is well balanced without excessive white space. Unity is created by the use of a limited color palette, the framing technique of enclosing shapes, repeating blocks and patterns, and the use of the same color background. The arrangement of elements creates a feeling of completeness, that nothing's missing. Now we'll talk about the elements of design. Color. Color is the first thing you see when you're looking at a quilt. This one uses red, green, and yellow, a split complementary color scheme. This is not an unusual color combination in 19th century quilts. Quilt makers were taking their visual cues from what works in the quilts that they saw around them. Value is the relative lightness and darkness of colors. Without value, we wouldn't have contrast. The yellow, red, and green have inherently contrasting values as well as colors. Placing them on a white background provides even more contrast. The shapes include two different stars, one a compass design, the other 8-pointed stars, vines, flowers with buds and leaves, pomegranates, circles, hearts, and stripes. There's a large variety of shapes and sizes. The vine in the outer rectangular blocks, once again, form a line that leads your eye in a circular shape. When you get close to this quilt, you'll also see that quilting forms lines too. And finally, texture. Texture is provided by the quilting stitches, which compress the fabric enough to form shadows on the surface of the quilt. Although this quilt does not, many quilts use printed fabric, which can also create a visual texture. There are a number of ways that a quilt top can be laid out or set. The simplest quilt construction is whole cloth. This one here. It can be made with either a full width or several widths of fabric, but without piecework. The plain quilt allows for elaborate quilting to be visible. This redwork quilt has a simple crosshatch quilting pattern, which goes through all the layers, and elaborate red embroidery, which only goes through the top layer. This quilt was made circa 1900. well into the crazy quilt fad of the late 1800s and features some of the same motifs. And then I'm referring to that quilt right on over there. Same motifs: flowers, fans, Cape Greenaway figures, as well as crossed American and Cuban flags, a reference to the Spanish-American War. Women sometimes use quilts to express their political opinions, as did this maker. Note that the motifs are well distributed over the top, without regard for orientation. Objects float in space with no real relationship to each other. Crazy quilts. By the late Victorian era, 1880s and 1900, quilts were sometimes used as throws on the sofa or piano. Crazy quilts often consisted of silk, velvet, and embroidery, fabrics that were often too fragile to be used in the bed. This crazy quilt, while still rectangular, has a shaped edge. Although the piecing is random, the blocks and borders contain the chaos. It features some of the same motifs as the redwood quilt shown previously, as well as Japanese motifs: birds, owls, flowers, butterflies, and fans scattered throughout. The Japanese aesthetic appears in fine arts during this time as well. It's a beautiful example of crazy quilting and is dated 1884. Quilts can also be constructed medallion style, with the centered design directing your attention to the middle of the quilt. Medallion quilts are usually symmetrical and balanced, top and bottom, and left and right, reflections of themselves. Many times they have multiple borders. This Amish Lone Star, circa 1930, was made in the Midwest. It has a dramatic central 8-pointed star made from solid color cotton, as are most Amish quilts. The success of the pattern depends on accuracy in cutting and piecing the diamond-shaped pieces. Fabric, unlike other materials, wants to stretch when it's cut on the diagonal or bias of the fabric. It takes an experienced quilt maker to pull this off well. Quilts can also be constructed using entirely one shape: squares, rectangles, triangles, diamonds, hexagons, parallelograms, geometric shapes that fit together. One-patch quilts are sometimes referred to as mosaic. The simplest shape is a square or rectangle. These can be arranged with or without regard for the distribution of the design. This quilt maker arranged the lights and darks in this checkerboard medallion quilt to achieve a central medallion and a balanced symmetrical design. It is highlighted with red pom-poms in the center of each square, or the center of most squares. I think some of them have since pulled out before it got to us. Quilt makers sometimes used what fabrics were available. Purchase yard goods, but also sewing scraps, factory scraps, suit samples, feed sacks that had printed designs and could be used to make household items and clothing. By understanding what materials were available during a period of time, one can assess when a quilt could have been made. Block design layouts, of which there are several. Many quilt tops are arranged in blocks, as is this one, both abstract and pictorial. It can be constructed using just triangles and squares. It's a very flexible design system. On the left is a pattern for Gadab, a very democratic donkey, and the paper templates you could use to construct the quilt top. It lets the maker know how many triangles and squares were needed in each color to complete a block. Quilt patterns appeared in magazines or newspapers, as well as in batting packages. This quilt was made circa 1950 by the mother of Tom Walker in Providence, Kentucky. Blocks can also be set on point rather than square or rotated 45 degrees rather than lining up with the edges of the quilt. This is a Wigsted feet circa 1850. Made by a member of the Gaither family in Iredell County, North Carolina, the maker's initials are quilted into it. This quilt is constructed using both applique and piecing and features the same color combination, red, green, and yellow. As an alternative to having blocks set directly next to each other, quilts can also have sashing or strips of fabric between each block. This one has a piece sashing and border. Triangles and squares can be used to form identical positive and negative shapes, or tessellations, as this Indiana puzzle quilt does. This quilt uses both feed sacks and denim pants. Recycled materials were popular during the Great Depression in the 1930s when money was scarce. The quilt is from Burke County, North Carolina. On the left are illustrations of the pieces needed to create this pattern. Log cabin blocks are constructed using squares surrounded by rectangles of different lengths. There are many ways to vary the lights and darks. Each option impacts the overall appearance of the quilt and actually has its own name. This configuration is called the barn raising set, referring to the concentric squares. This log cabin, made circa 1900 to 1915, also has a diagonal line of light colored squares, as shown in the illustration on the left. Many log cabins have a red center square, reportedly representing the hearth and home. This quilt was collected in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. These two quilts are constructed using essentially the same block, a quarter circle within a square. Just like in the log cabin, the placement of lights and darks makes a difference in how a pattern is perceived, and each arrangement also has its own name. On the left is a drunkard's path, made circa 1900 by Mary Effie Goodwin Seymour of Wake County. On the right is a Robbing Peter to Pay Paul, made circa 1890 by a member of the Schlosser-Pritchard family in Blacksburg, Virginia. The inside illustration shows the blocks used to create these quilts. The pattern on the left has alternating blocks, where the one on the right alternating color. The quilts on the left, these are randomly pieced blocks. The quilt on the left, Crosses and Strips, was made circa 1910 to 1920 and collected in Clay County, North Carolina. This quilt is made from vertical strips of crosses alternating with vertical strips of horizontal pieces. These blocks are constructed using various random sizes, yet the maker has made them all fit together to form a rectangular quilt. Strip piece quilts of this kind are sometimes made by African American quilt makers. This is clearly a scrap bag quilt. The gray dress is contemporary with the quilt and shows what kind of clothing was made at home and would have generated these scraps. Finally, we have wheel designs. We don't know specifically who made these two quilts, but we do know they were made in the mid-19th century by members of the Bridgers family in Edgecombe County, North Carolina. On the left is a mariner's compass pattern, on the right a carpenter's wheel pattern. And they're hanging side by side just on the other side of that wall. Wheel designs can be pieced or appliqued or both. These wheels are sewn in blocks. The blocks on the left are arranged to form a checkerboard. The wheels don't fill the white background, and appear to float in space. Its regular repetition appears more formal than the composition on the right. On the right, the blocks are turned on point. The diagonal lines of the set move the eye in a more dynamic way. Although both quilts use the same colors, same fabrics, red, blue, yellow, and green, the quilt makers have used different quantities of the same color. The quilt on the left having far more blue, the one on the right far more yellow, illustrating the concept of color proportion. Finally. Okay. We've addressed the who, what, when, and where of the quilts in this exhibit, but not the why. On that, we can only speculate. Quilts were made for a variety of reasons. Some practical, a bed covering was needed to keep warm, to use up what was available. Some were made to commemorate events, births, marriages, graduation from school. Some were made for raising funds for churches or schools, and some were made for loved ones. But most makers, I'm certain, wanted to create an object of beauty with their own hands, and that in itself is a rewarding and satisfying experience. We are grateful to them for seeing that their quilts made their way to us. Thanks for coming out tonight, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. Yes.
On the commercial market, a lot of, say like Joann's and Hancock's are taking out a lot of their fashion fabrics and putting in quilting cotton fabrics. And I was wondering why you think that trend towards quilting is becoming so popular in the past few years.
It's been growing since the 70s. When I first started quilting in 77, there was very, very few places you could get quilting fabric that wasn't totally cornball. I think it's economic. Back in the 50s, it was more make clothing than to buy clothing. And I think that's not true anymore. I think it's very expensive to make a garment out of fabric that you buy in a store. It has to be something pretty special to devote that kind of time to. And quilters buy far more fabric than they actually use. I mean, there's having a stash, and the bumper stickers that say she who has the most fabric wins.
She who buys the most fabric wins.
That's it. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
The fabric is our paint.
That's it.
And they change the colors. The manufacturers change the colors. So one year you might get a yellow green, the next year you're going to get a more blue green. So you have to buy it while you see it.
It's so true.
And I think that's what ended up developing the idea of having a stash, and then from there it became a joke. But it is over $1 billion a year industry now.
It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's enormous. I had an opportunity to go to the quilt market last spring, and it's an enormous industry. There are a lot of people involved in that field. Other questions? Yes.
My family owns a few very special quilts. What would you suggest? We don't know how to save them or keep them, or how should I make them last the longest? I guess they're about to be turned out to be.
Okay. Mary, would you like to field this one?
Sure.
Mary's our registrar. That's right.
You want to try and guard against a couple different things. Don't keep them in a cedar chest no matter what your grandma tells you. Wood actually itself leaches an acid that's going to yellow and degrade the fabric. So the best place for a quilt, it wants to live where we want to live. It wants about 70 degrees, about 50% humidity. So take it out of an attic or basement and put it in a closet, it can be on the top shelf, but put it in a room that's going to be air conditioned and heated like the rest of your house. A real easy thing to do is just put it in a pillowcase, a nice cotton washed clean pillowcase. That'll give it a little dust control and give you an acid-free environment for it. If you can afford it, they make acid-free boxes and acid-free tissue and desiccant canisters to keep it from getting moldy and all kinds of stuff. But simple, easy methods. Wrap it up nice. If you can roll it, fine. But cardboard tubes are also acidic, so you don't want those with aluminum foil, and there's all kinds of things that.
And no tissue paper, which is what we all think is the best thing.
Your average everyday tissue paper is acidic, so you either need to buy acid-free tissue paper or just cut up some old sheets that are good and clean and use that to pat it out or wrap it with.
And pattern folds.
Yeah.
Yeah, if at all possible.
If you're lucky enough to have a spare bedroom, some people do, you can lay them flat on the bed and put a cover over them like a bedspread, and that would let them rest comfortably and keep the cats off. Anyone else?
Do you have a favorite quilt in the show? I had to ask you that.
Yeah. And at the same time, I didn't see it coming, and I should have. The quilt that I featured with the big compass is such a spectacular quilt. But I really have a tender spot for this crazy quilt as well. And there's a row of embroidery on it. It's a wonderful sampler of embroidery stitches, but there's one row that are like little pagodas. That's really quite fabulous. That's just so charming. Yeah, Mary.
Do you think a white quilt can be graphic, an all white quilt?
Yes, because of the quilting. You have to contrast something on the white, and the contrast could be the stitching. And I've seen whitework quilts that are fabulous because of the stitching on them. And there's also a tradition that we don't have any in this exhibit, but we have some upstairs that are trapunto, which is stuffing the quilted areas, so it creates a dimension. And sometimes you see grapes and some really fabulous things going on in the whitework quilts. But we didn't choose any of those for the exhibit. Yes.
In designing your quilts, what's your inspiration? I've
make usually color. If I'm making a traditional or semi kind of contemporary traditional quilt, I usually consider color first and pattern second. For the quilts that I make that are art quilts, I'm using digital imagery and having them printed out on silk at TC Square and Cary, and then taking them to another step past that. So I use a lot of Photoshop in my work. Yes, Toby.
Can you talk a little bit from a curatorial perspective how you and Kathy made the selections for this exhibition? Just sort of the process. It can be general, but.
Oh, yeah. Well, first we had to figure out what exactly does the Gregg own. And the Gregg owns about 220 quilts, is it safe to say? Everything from baby quilts to spectacular quilts, and everything in between. Some of them are really in poor condition. So what we did is figure out what do we actually have to work with. Eliminated the ones that have been shown repeatedly, eliminated the ones that were really poor condition, and then ended up with a batch of about maybe 70 quilts to consider. Took the best of some that were visually similar, and then figured out how much time do we have and how much energy can we put into doing conservation on them. And went with as minimal amount of conservation as we could get away with. And mostly that conservation involves stitching seams back together and working with shattered silk to cover it to make sure it doesn't get worse. Yes.
Were any of the silks in the crazy quilts deteriorated?
Oh gosh, yeah.
From that, was it leaded? Whatever they put in.
It was a mordant that was used to dye them that really deteriorated. Yes, we see that. There's one really beautiful pink crazy quilt that's so lovely and so delicate, and I love pink. Such a girl. And but it just practically falls apart when you go to touch it. And we just couldn't spend the kind of time and energy that we would have taken to get that to exhibit ready.
I was amazed at what condition they were in.
Some of them, yeah, and some of them have really been heirlooms, and they've been cherished by the people who own them, and they've been taken care of. And of course, we're taking care of them as best we can upstairs in climate-controlled environment, and they're put on rolls or folded in boxes, and we're doing our best effort to make sure that they survive for far longer. Yes.
I'm just curious, do you have any Mennonite quilts? Like from Pennsylvania or?
Not that I know of. Not specifically that I know of. We have the 2 Amish quilts in the back. But I've already forgotten where they're from. Zoe, does it say?
Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.
Okay. Yes.
I'm not sure if you said it, but how long would one of these, like a handmade quilt, would you say making them?
It could really vary. There's speed piecing techniques now that you can zip together a quilt top in a Saturday, Sunday afternoon using squares and triangles. A crazy quilt like this would have taken a lot of time. But for instance, that checkerboard medallion with the red pom-poms may have taken not that long. I really can't speculate because I don't know my own quilts. I make over a period of time. So it may take a year to finally get the binding on it and consider it done. But it goes in stages where it's pieced and then quilted. Because life interferes with the things you really want to do. Yeah.
What are some current trends that you're seeing in the quilting scene?
Oh gosh. I don't know. Can you answer that?
I can answer that.
What are the current trends you're seeing in quilting?
art is in, well, you're seeing what looks like an oil painting or an acrylic painting with the quilting being minimal to the painting. I think that's the newest thing, painting on fabric,
Okay.
airbrushing.
You're also seeing a lot of hand-dyed fabrics.
Yeah.
Women are getting into dyeing their own fabric rather than buying commercial. And it's part of some of its color too. You can dye, or you can try to dye as close as possible to a color you have in your mind. But that's kind of a tricky process, as some of the textile students know who have tried that.
Isn't it also a little competitive having a fabric in your quilt that nobody else has differently?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. But in a way, you've also transformed all the materials to be your materials in that process. So you could look at it both ways. Yeah.
So you said before that clothing is moving to be where only special pieces are handmade because it's so expensive. Is it the same with quilting? And do you think quilting is moving from being pieces for functionality to pieces that are more for their artistic value?
Oh, completely. Yeah. There's almost like two camps, art quilters and traditional quilters, and they don't necessarily interact a whole lot. It's very funny, not in a good funny way. I'd like to see that change, because sometimes I feel like I'm the enemy in the other camp when I'm talking to traditional quilters, and the same is true with art quilters. I don't think they really understand what the other side is up to. Would you like to add something to that? Yeah.
When it comes to the actual quilting, if someone was doing it by hand and they wanted to do like a complicated sort of pattern, how would they have done that? Would they have drawn onto the fabric and then stitched over it, or
there's a couple of different ways of doing it. There's in the really old quilts there were not templates but patterns that had holes in them, and you could pounce some sort of dried material to create a line that you then followed when you sewed. Today, there are invisible markers that you can use to mark a quilt top. A lot of quilts now are being machine sewn by long arm quilting machines, and they use a pantograph where they're following a design, but they're not actually, the design just exists on paper, and you can follow it using an electronic eye, I believe is how it works. So you don't actually have to mark the quilt top. Yes?
There's also free motion quilting, which Carol Ryder Ballard started.
Right.
And she gets $50,000 and up for her quilt.
Yeah.
As does Hollis Chatelain, who's right here in Hillsborough.
Yeah.
And she does a series of painted quilts. She lived in Africa for some years, and that's pretty much the subject.
Right. I've seen some of her quilts. They're really quite fabulous. They really bridge that gap between not traditional, but art and textile. Because she's really painting or drawing directly onto the fabric and then turning that into a quilt. They're really quite fabulous. So Hollis Chatelain is not his name.
But they're not bed quilts.
No, they're meant for the wall. Most of these quilts in this exhibit are meant for the bed. The two in the front, the Sass-Colby quilts, are meant for the wall. But the others, for the most part, are meant for the bed or the parlor. As another layer of decoration in the Victorian home that had layers upon layers of pattern. Anyone else? Can stand up here and talk all day. Okay, well, thanks for coming, and I appreciate you coming out.
Thank you, Janine.